All right, guys, in today's video, what we're going to be after is replacing the rear shock absorber. You can see on this particular shock absorber that we've got leakage of the internal hydraulic fluid, which is a sign that it's time to replace this. A lot of times, you can get some small amounts of wetness well up underneath the dust cover, but that's really weepage, and that's not really a bad sign. It's a bad sign when you get it all the way down like this or anywhere that you can see it past the dust boot or dust cover. This particular truck is a 99 Suburban. It's got the 6.5 liter diesel on it, so the rear axle hardware here is equivalent to a 3/4 ton truck. It's a semi-floating axle. It's the larger size. So what I'm going to show today will apply to any of the bigger GMT 400 old body style type trucks for removing it. It's not too bad of a job. Mostly what I'm going to cover here is the replacement. So this is the optional gas-charged Bilstein type shocks that you could get in the 90s. Regular production option RPO FG5, and I'll show you how to tell if you have that option, and I'll show you how you can tell to get the correct type of Bilstein replacement shock. What we're going to end up doing here is taking off this nut and bolt, 21 millimeter on both sides. We're going to wire wheel it up to get the rust off. Then we're going to hit it with some PB Blaster. And let me show you the two 13 millimeter fasteners that hold it up in the top. Then we'll get it out, and I'll show you really the main thing is how to pick the replacement. All right, guys, here's a view on the upper area. At the very top here, there are two 13 millimeter bolts that are securing it, right? One here and one here. And the type of nuts that are used on this era truck, I'll show you on the other side in a minute. They're not regular nuts. They're just captive fasteners that attach onto the metal, and these bolts go right through them. These two bolts here are 13. So let me show you the type of captive nuts that are on the other side. All right, guys, so in this position here, you can see where the two 13 millimeter bolts are protruding through those two captive nuts I was describing. You can see they're just kind of slid on top of the metal piece, or rather slid on top of the metal flange, and then the bolt goes right through them. If we zoom in on one of them here, you can see how it's captured on the edge. All right, so we're going to get up here, we're going to wire wheel the threads, and we're going to hit them with PB Blaster as well. Let's get started taking this guy off. All right, let's go get the ones on top now. All right, guys, I can't get you up here while I was applying everything, but here's a view afterwards. You can see the two bolts rather. They look like studs. They're just two bolt threads sticking through those captive nuts. We've got those doused down with penetrating fluid, letting them soak. At this point, we're now ready to pull all three fasteners. And again, for this job, you do not need to lift the vehicle off the ground. The shocks are not supporting the vehicle in any way, so we can take this off without any of that extra apparatus. So let's go ahead and get started removing it. All right, that's one. There's a washer on here too. It's natural for it to want to fully extend once you've done that. Now we go after the two 13s. And I see what happens with these kind of nuts is they can break off like what just happened. We're going to have to get something on there to hold it in place. All right, guys, this one came out. So that's all it is, a little 13 millimeter. But the other one's stuck. But we should should be able to get something up there and hold that captive nut and get this other bolt off, and I'll show you what it looks like. Trying to get a grab on it here. Might have to grab a pair of vice grips instead. Yep, let's get a pair of vice grips on there. Really rusted on there. Alright guys, so we got this one out now. We'll lay this out and show you how to identify the replacement. What we ended up doing, I find these pipe wrenches work out really good for problems like this. Sometimes the vice grips just can't get a grip on these kind of fasteners. I'm going to have to probably put this guy in the vise to get it to let go. That's how good it grabs. But you can see it's a very thin piece of metal that would end up grabbing onto the flange up there. It's easily bent, particularly if it's rusted and corroded like this, it's easily broken off. So this is a good way to get this thing off. All right, so we got these both off, and even for the ones that didn't break off, we got the passenger side off without any of them breaking, but they still should be replaced because of corrosion for exactly what happened here. Let's go ahead and show how to identify whether you had Bilstein shocks and how to replace them. All right, guys, the way you tell if you had these Bilstein premium shocks originally is you open up the glove box on these old body style trucks and you'll find the service information tag where the regular production options are, the RPOs. And if you come down here, what you're looking for is this guy here. Frank George 5, FG5, signifies that you had front and rear Bilstein upgraded premium shocks when the vehicle was originally built. All right, guys, we got both shocks out like I mentioned. There's a lot of corrosion on the outside. Some other reasons why you'd want to replace these. Getting cracks in the bushings down here, for example. You can see it still says where it was Bilstein on here. The other thing that's important to point out is, right, you just kind of keep it on the one that was leaking. But yeah, over here. These are gas-charged shocks. And a lot of people don't realize that gas-charged shocks, are still going to have hydraulic oil in them. Doesn't matter whether it's gas charged or not, it's going to have hydraulic oil. This is a monotube design. In fact, Bilstein invented the monotube design shock absorber back in 1956. You're going to find numbers on the bottom here. I think this leaky one is the easiest to read. There's going to be a GM part number stamped in here. There's going to be a date code. And then there's going to be a Bilstein number stamped in here. The most equivalent thing this maps to that's not a GM OEM part, of course Bilstein is the OEM and GM is the redistributor in this case, would be a Bilstein B6 4600 shock, and in the description I'll show you the mapping. But for this particular number, 15032326, that's a really old number from when it was on the assembly line. It was never a service number, but that actually maps over still to this part here that's still available, 1247 4902. Maybe this label's a little better. These labels, for some reason, are really worn. You open this guy up. What we'll find inside is brand new shock. And we'll see that same number, 15032326. So this is the identification number, although as you can see here, it doesn't always map exactly to the number that GM sells the shock on, it is a good number for matching to what the shock is that you want. So as long as those numbers are the same, you're keeping everything exactly the way it was when it was originally off the assembly line. So I got 2 of these to replace that, and inside the box here it'll come with some new mounting hardware. So like I was saying, we want to replace these old captive nuts. They give you some new versions of these. It's going to be like Christmas tree lights though, right? They're all going to be tangled up like this one. You got to work them out. But they're plated, so they'll last another 15 years or so before they get corroded. You want to use the new 13s they give you and discard the old ones. And you want to use the new 21 bolt nut and washer. Basically, you're going to throw all the old hardware away, and you're going to replace it with the new GM hardware they include in the package. So let's get this on here, and I'll go over the torque values, and then again I'll talk about some more options for this. Like, let's say that you couldn't find a good deal on this GM number. Well, what would be the Bilstein number that's equivalent? What you'll find if you go to the Bilstein website is these B64600s, there's dozens of different versions. And by the way, they're still made in Germany. That's another good indicator here. This is a very high quality shock, and it was a good option to have back in the day. I'll show you what the equivalent numbers are for a lot of these old body style trucks. I won't go over all of them, but I'll go over most of them. All right, guys, you don't know how long these have been in the box, right? So before we go into the truck, we want to make sure that we at least push them down a couple of times, very slowly, just to get the fluid and the nitrogen gas that's inside circulating really well. And it'll also make it where when we get underneath and we need to be able to compress it to get into the position for the fasteners, we'll be able to do it laying on the ground without being on a lift. Right? By doing that a couple of times, we should be in a position where we can compress this like this. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be doable. All right, let's get under there and install it. All right, the first thing we're going to want to do is get these old nuts out of here. All right, so they just come off like that. And then we're going to put the new ones in. So make sure you put them in the right orientation. The hats are going to face up. Right, so they're going to go like that. I'm kind of one-handed here with the camera, guys, but make sure you get it on the hole because they're going to be tight, because they're new. They're going to be gripping that flange. Get the one on the other side, and you'll be ready to mount. All right, guys, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take an awl or a pick, and I'm going to make sure I've got these nuts correctly lined up with our holes. Just make it easier to get these new bolts threaded in. We'll bring our new shock up. You can pay attention on the bottom. I'll show you later, how you want to have it situated where you can see the labels or not. Grab our first of our 13s. Try to get it started by hand. Emphasis on try. Make sure you're wearing eye protection too, because there's all kinds of crud that falls down from here. I know you guys can't see like nothing, but bear with me for a second. You'll see soon enough. All right, we're going to hit the camera with the shock, so we're going to let it dangle for a second while we get the other bolt. Grab a socket and an extension. And we're going to thread them in by hand as far as they'll go. Because again, these types of nuts, it doesn't take much torque to ruin them. So we want to make sure we're not cross-threading anything, and we want to make sure that we're not going to put excessive force on it that might cause them to get damaged, right? Not going to tighten it all the way. We're just going to get it so we're sure that it's started good, not cross-threaded, tightening up nice and smoothly. Because when we go up here to torque it, we don't want to damage this captive nut when we do that either. All right, I'm not going to tighten it up until we get the bottom end, but that's the general gist. We'll come back here and torque it afterwards. Let's switch our view down and do the lower bolt.
Go.
All right, so it's still going to be hard, guys, but we're going to compress this into position.
Say it over.
We're going to compress this into position. Going to get our bolt ready. And I'll tell you, if you don't do that compression step that I showed you earlier, you'll never be able to get it to do what we just did. And this is one of these kind of nuts that's going to kind of lock itself into position, right? Similar to the top, we're not going to try to fully torque it yet. We're just going to get it snugged up, then we'll switch to the torque wrench. But you'll feel this type of nut start to get hard about halfway in, and that's normal. At least if you're putting on the GM package. I don't know if the genuine Bilsteins have the same hardware as what GM packages or not. So let me snug this up and we'll go over the torque values. All right, guys, let's torque these up. Now, this is a four-wheel drive vehicle. And so the 13s up here on this four-wheel drive vehicle are 13 foot-pounds. This one. 13 foot-pounds here, and 13 Alright, there's a click there. It's kind of bouncing against the frame. The 13 foot-pounds torque is only on the four-wheel drive ones, though. I'll show you in the service manual right after this the different torque values. All right, so now let's get this guy that's 74 foot-pounds. Actually, I'll see if can I get this in here? Might be easier to do that end, even though it's got the sway bar a little bit in the way. All you gotta do is 74. It's just an awkward position. Torque this. Well, I guess I'm going to switch this side, guys, just, without it being off the ground. I'm trying to do this without getting it off the ground because you don't need to. It's a question of getting enough leverage to do 74. There we go. 74 foot-pounds. All right, let's do the one on the other side, and then I'll show you what it says on the service manual. All right, guys, here's the passenger side, just to show you the orientation there. You'll notice on these design trucks, the passenger side shock is forward of the axle, whereas the one we were working on primarily on the driver's side is aft of the axle. But notice on both sides, at least for this particular chassis type, the bolts and nuts orientation are the same, where the nuts are always facing the left hand or driver's side. So that one's in and torqued down. So let's go wrap it up with the torque values. All right, guys, if we take a look at the 99 service manual for the CK trucks, old body style, not new body style. They ran through 2000, so you got to be careful to get the right manual. And we go take a look at the section on the rear suspension, and we talk about the shock absorber replacement. We can see on the two-wheel drives, the C trucks, that the torque value for the lower nut is 52 foot-pounds, and the torque value for the upper two nuts rather, is 11 foot-pounds. But the K models, the four-wheel drives, we see that the torque value for the lower nut, as we did on ours here today, was 74 foot-pounds, and the torque on the two uppers are 13 foot-pounds. So when you look at the picture, the mounting setup is very similar, but the torque values are not the same. Right? So here's both views from the lower side. Here's a view from the upper side. Now you'll notice in this diagram the bolts coming in from the top rather than the bottom. The 3/4 ton trucks, like we did today, the hardware that we have today, even though this is a 1500 Suburban, it has a 6.5 liter diesel engine, so it's got the 3/4 ton chassis and suspension system. The bolts come in from the bottom. But some models, like the 1500s, are going to come in from the top, like you see here. All right, so that's the torque value. We'll do one more thing underneath, and we are done. The only other thing I'll show you from the service manual, back in the day, there was a concern about how to dispose of these shock absorbers because of the nitrogen gas that was inside. And the dealer used to tell their technicians to be mindful of drilling some drain holes in these before disposing of them. You don't have to worry about that nowadays, at least where I am, you don't, because you can return these in to a number of places and they'll take them without doing that. But if you're not and you're concerned about this, there's some information that you can pause the video and see on how to prepare this so that you can just dump the oil out, vent the nitrogen. The nitrogen is what most of the Earth's atmosphere is. There's no problem venting it into the atmosphere. And then you can just recycle it as scrap metal. All right, guys, so we've got everything torqued. You've seen how the torque is. These are a nice type of shock absorber, so we'll definitely clean off any dirt or grease we got on installing them. Don't worry about the paint peeling from the rubber bushings down here. That's perfectly normal. Paint doesn't stick well to rubber. When they make these at the factory, they obviously just spray the whole thing. So eventually that'll all work its way off and you'll just have black rubber showing on the bushings, and then the eyelet will remain yellow, at least until the road corrosion gets to it. So that's it. Easy job. Not much to it. Make sure you check in the description where I'll show you not just the GM part number we use for this particular vehicle, but the GM part numbers for several other vehicles that had RPO Frank George 5, FG5. I'll also show you the current Bilstein B6 4600 series part numbers if you want to go that route. Remember, you got to replace these in pairs. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. We only had this side leaking. The other side was not. But when you have one go, you need to replace them in pairs. Ideally, you do all four, but GM doesn't require that in the service manual. But you do need to replace both rears when you do the rears, or if you do both fronts, one of the fronts, you need to replace both of them. I hope this video helps you out. If you got questions or comments, leave them below and I'll try to help. If you found this video helpful, saved you some money, or just entertaining, pay it forward and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.